Hello everyone, welcome to the Externalities practice quiz video. This video will be based on all of the videos dealing with externalities. So I would recommend watching those videos before you try to answer the questions that are in this practice quiz. So can you answer these questions? What is an externality? Why are externalities considered market failures? What is the outcome of a market with a negative externality? What is the outcome of a market with a positive externality? And the final question is, what are some public policy options for the government to intervene in markets with externalities? So if you've watched the externality videos, you should be able to answer these questions. So I would take some time right now to pause the video and try to answer these questions yourself. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully by now you've taken the time to try to answer these questions on your own. And if you've had some difficulties trying to answer these questions, I do recommend going back and watching the full-length videos to help you better understand these key concepts about externalities. So the first question I asked was, what is an externality? And the formal definition that I gave in the lecture note videos for an externality is the uncompensated impact of one person's actions on the well-being of a bystander. And there are two types of externalities that we talked about in the videos. There are positive externalities and negative externalities. So a positive externality is that your private actions or the private actions of a company or some other economic actor has some kind of positive spillover onto the well-being of other people around you. For example, a positive externality could be getting vaccinated. And a negative externality, on the other hand, is that your personal actions or the actions of some other economic actor have a negative impact on the people surrounding them. So an example of a negative externality would be air pollution or not social distancing during a pandemic. The next question I asked is why are externalities considered market failures? So to kind of summarize this idea, I have, self-interested buyers and sellers often neglect the external costs or benefits of their actions. So in economics, we assume that, individuals or businesses are self-interested. They only really care about the private benefits or the private costs to themselves and don't really take into account how their decisions may impact the people or businesses that surround them. So in cases where, the private actions of individuals or businesses have some kind of externality, whether it be positive or negative, the decision of the private person causing the externality isn't going to take into account how they're impacting other people. So if we are trying to analyze, the welfare of society as a whole, we will find that the private market outcome of whatever action this private individual is taking is not going to be efficient. It's not going to be maximizing, the total welfare or the total surplus of everyone in a certain society. So what are the specific outcomes of a market with a negative externality and a positive externality? Well, if there is a certain market that has a positive externality, we found in the videos that there is not enough of this activity taking place. So again, to kind of summarize what we talked about on the last slide, self-interested actors in the economy aren't taking into account the fact that their actions have some kind of positive benefit to those people around them. So they should be pursuing this action more because society's benefits are much greater than, one person's private benefits. But that private person isn't taking that into account. They just care about the benefits to themselves. So the market equilibrium is going to be less than what would be socially optimal for, society as a whole to be as well off as they could be. On the negative side, there's too much of the activity taking place. So along the same lines of logic like we just talked about with positive externalities, with a negative externality, the person making the private decision to pursue some action doesn't realize that there are negative consequences on the people surrounding them. So to make society, well off as a whole, there should be less of this activity, going on. So the market equilibrium of this private individual or this private business is, this market equilibrium is greater than what would be socially optimal. So in the cases of both positive and negative externalities, we see that if we're considering the well-being of, an entire society, the market equilibrium is not going to produce enough, or it's going to produce too much of these certain goods or services or whatever we're talking about. So because of this, it is argued that there is a role for the government to step in and try to correct some of these different situations. So more specifically, the final question I asked was, what are some public policy options for the government to intervene in markets with externalities? So because there is not enough of a certain activity taking place that is that has a positive externality, one action the government could do is subsidize people to pursue this action more. So in the lecture notes, I gave the example of vaccines. So private individuals only take into account, the private benefit that they would get from being vaccinated. But they don't realize that them being vaccinated has a positive kind of spillover. There's this positive externality on everyone around them. Everyone around them is less likely to get sick. So more people should be vaccinated. However, the private individual is only taking into account their private benefits, not society's benefits. So to encourage people to pursue this activity more, the government could subsidize people to get vaccinated, pay them, a certain amount of money if they get vaccinated. And this may encourage some more people to go out and get vaccinated. On the negative side of things, since there's too much of this activity taking place, it is argued that the government should not subsidize this action, but actually tax or penalize the person or the company that is producing too much of this certain good. So for example, I talked briefly about air pollution being a negative externality. The private factory that is producing, this pollution doesn't take into account that the pollution negatively impacts all of the people that live around the factory. So one thing the government could do to make sure this factory doesn't pollute as much is to tax or penalize this certain factory. And again, those are two, subsidizing and taxing. These are two very broad policy options. As you go into more specific cases of different markets, a lot of the nuances of these policies could get really detailed and complicated. So there is some room to also propose the idea that the government shouldn't intervene in certain situations with externalities. The government should just allow the private individuals to come up with a solution on their own. So again, going back to the factory example that's polluting, if the factory and let's say the residents of the town nearby the factory come to some agreement amongst themselves, then the government wouldn't need to intervene in this certain situation. And we talked about different types of private solutions. But as we move to, I guess, markets that involve a lot of people being impacted by these externalities, coming to these private solutions becomes a little bit more difficult. So hopefully you guys were able to answer these questions about externalities. If you did have difficulties, I do recommend going back and watching the full-length videos in the externalities playlist.